Coming up on No Pulp, breaking news. Fans hate referees. The end of the LSU-Kentucky game is the latest in the eternal battle, and Zach and I have our 2 cents on that and the Kentucky-Tennessee game.
And here in Syracuse, we are very, very familiar with vacated wins, but how exactly do we feel about them? I have a feeling you don't like them. Find out that and more. No Pulp starts right now.
I got this, I'm winning. I'm hella filthy, so I got this, I'm winning.
Kentucky dominated Tennessee 86-69. Nice performance all around, and that's what we're going to be starting with. Zach Lang, Adam Unger here on No Pulp. So the Wildcats win. Zach, what does it mean for the SEC as a whole, and what does it mean for Tennessee?
What it means as a whole is people think, oh, Tennessee, they're not great anymore. But the fact is, Tennessee is good. Did people really expect Tennessee to beat Kentucky? No, because Kentucky's a perennial powerhouse team in the SEC. They've won 4 straight SEC tournament championships, and out of 3 of the last 4 seasons, they've won the regular season title or shared it. So ultimately, Kentucky is just a fantastic team. So I don't know why people are really harping on Tennessee being like, oh, we knew this was going to happen. They're not really the team we thought they were, because they're good. It's just Kentucky's better.
Well, Kentucky is who we thought they were.
Yeah.
Year in and year out, you always see them, and I don't think this really has an impact on the SEC necessarily at all. You touched on Kentucky. They're not as good as some people were making them out to be. So at this point, I think when you look at the truly elite teams in the NCAA, those 1 seeds that you know are going to be coming in, it's not Tennessee anymore, but the SEC still has one, and now it's Kentucky.
Right. Now, all right, let's moving on. So speaking of Kentucky, a little bit a while ago, so the referees basically blew a game in Kentucky versus LSU, or at least that's what the fans think. So KU is so basically that's what happened. LSU, Kentucky goes down to the wire. LSU hits a buzzer beater, and then next thing you know, the SEC is releasing a statement saying, oh, hey, we need to go back and look at some of these games. You can see the statement right here. But honestly, Adam, I don't know if this was even an issue.
I don't think it's an issue at all, because here's the thing. It was a goaltend on both teams at the same time. And here's what I mean by that. Seconds before the tip-in goes in, E.J. Montgomery actually put his hand up through the rim. Yeah. That's a defensive goaltend, so if you want to call the offensive goaltend, you look at what already happened before that. I think with them both, I think at that point you just let the kids play, balling it up, going in. The ball was on its way out of the cylinder as it got tipped back in anyway. Still in the cylinder, but on its way out. You can see there. I see absolutely no problem with it. You can already see it on its way out.
Yeah, I know the rule is technically supposed to be if the ball is above the cylinder, then it's an offensive basket interference. The fact is, the refs didn't call it. The reason why they went back to look at it is because they needed to see if the tip-in was good. The tip-in was great. There was time to spare on it, and the ball went in with plenty of time. LSU wins. Everyone goes home happy, except for the Kentucky fans who were attending the game, obviously. But right now, Kentucky is playing New Orleans Saints, because right now they're like, oh, the refs blew the game. We want justice. We want them to change the rules so we can make sure that we continue to win.
There's 39 more minutes of basketball to ensure that you can win. It's not like the NFL where, say, the AFC Championship game, not to completely change gears here, but a coin flip doesn't decide these types of things.
Right.
You had 39 prior minutes to make sure that it didn't get to that point. Plus, LSU is a good team.
Yeah.
They're not a great team like Kentucky or Duke or Virginia, but they're still a good team. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what happened there, because you can't even use replay to check a goaltend. You said it already. They're only going for the tip-in.
Right, and the one thing I want to point out is the SEC is putting out this statement saying, oh, maybe we should go back and change the rules so refs can go back and, call some of these interferences when they technically aren't supposed to. But the one thing I want to point out is, would this scenario have happened if it wasn't Kentucky? Because Kentucky's the team that's losing this. And I already mentioned this. Kentucky's a perennial powerhouse team.
So you're saying if LSU lost, no one makes a big deal out of it?
Right. Think about some other SEC teams. Think about if this was like Vanderbilt versus Alabama.
Yeah.
Do you think they'd be releasing this statement? If it wasn't a top 20 matchup, do they put out this statement to try and to appease some of these fans?
I don't think it's so much the teams that were taking part in the game as much as it was the stage that it's on.
Right.
So I think regardless of team, I think if you have a game in that kind of spotlight, a midweek game in a Power 5 conference, one of the best conferences in basketball this year, you're going to have that result as long as it's not 2 bottom feeders.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So moving on from one conference to another, we've already talked a lot of SEC, and we've already talked about the Big Ten before as well. It's beating itself up. Michigan went down to Penn State, the worst team in the conference. Take a look at the top 10. Penn State nowhere to be found. 2-12 in the Big Ten, 9-16 overall. So with Michigan going down to a team like that, is the Big Ten actually so mediocre because it's so competitive within itself?
I don't think they're mediocre. I think you already touched on it. They're just a very competitive conference. And the big difference is, I want to compare this to another basketball conference. You have the ACC and you have the Big Ten. They are two incredibly different conferences.
They do some challenge every year, too.
Exactly. But like the ACC is top heavy. You have Duke and you have Virginia at the top, and you have Louisville in there this year, and they're top heavy. The rest of the teams don't do well. Obviously, Penn State is the worst team in the Big Ten this year. But the fact is, we have seen other Big Ten teams come out and beat top teams in that conference. Michigan State lost to Illinois. So it's not like they're...
Indiana?
Yes.
Indiana.
Yes, and
Okay.
Illinois, though.
Yep.
It was both teams.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. That just proves my point.
Exactly.
The point is they are a competitive conference, and that doesn't mean they're mediocre. It just means, and it doesn't mean, so with Michigan and Penn State, I want to bring that game back into context.
It makes the worst teams better, too.
Right.
So it's a converse effect that goes both ways, not just one. Is that what you're getting at?
Kind of. So what I'm basically saying is you have Penn State and you have Michigan. Just because Penn State was more competitive that night does not mean Michigan was not the better team.
Yeah. I agree. I honestly think you still look at this conference, you see 6 locks. You see Michigan, Michigan State, Purdue, Maryland, Wisconsin, Iowa. You look at those teams, they are in no matter what happens. All of them have to lose out the rest of the Big Ten the rest of the way in order to not be in the tournament. So I really think in terms of the strength, you don't see as much top heaviness, but it's still almost as deep as the ACC this year, and it's beaten itself up. We've seen the roles reversed, too.
I completely agree with you. Now, coming up, the 2019 lacrosse season is underway, and all the top seeds are falling like dominoes. We talk Duke Lax and more when we return. Stay tuned. This is No Pulp.
Here we go. We're going to go out there in the rain. We're going to get wet. All right, here we go. Okay, quick. Oh, yeah. Yes. So much fun. Mwah. We're getting so wet.
Patriotism. It inspires passionate debate, and it's worn like a badge of honor with good reason, because it means love and devotion for one's country. But what really makes up this country of ours? It's the people. To love America is to love all Americans. This year, patriotism shouldn't just be about pride of country. It should be about love. Love beyond age, sexuality, disability, race, religion, and other labels. Because love has no labels.
Welcome back to No Pulp. Zach Lang, Adam Unger here. Now let's cut right to it. Vacating wins, something the NCAA has done a lot in football and basketball. Now, Adam, should schools vacate wins? Where do you draw the line?
Well, I think the punishment, I think every time that vacating wins has happened, it's been a justified issue. You see some of those cases, Louisville, Michigan, Syracuse. You think about Adidas. You think about the academic integrity. You think about those types of things. You look at USC for football, Ohio State. Having those vacated, it's not that those situations weren't justified.
Right.
Vacating wins doesn't do anything. It's a meaningless punishment.
Right. I
You
totally agree.
punish the past,
Yeah.
so what?
So
What do
punish
you do?
the future.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Punish the
like-
present, punish the future. Look at what they did with Penn State. Much more egregious than anything that we saw up there. I'm not gonna, that's not the argument that I'm trying to make here. But when you see those types of things happen, punishments in the future should be in line.
I
Loss
totally
of
agree.
scholarship,
And the-
bowl ineligibility, tournament ineligibility, those types of things.
Yeah, and the biggest thing I want to say is it's not like they're vacating the game itself. Because the point is, like, in reference for Syracuse, Jim Boeheim, if you ask anyone in Central New York, he has over 1,000 wins,
Yeah.
but technically he's got somewhere in the 900s. But the point is, if you ask any Central New Yorker, he's got over 1,000 because people don't care. They don't reference it anyway. It only matters in the tally marks. And in the end, it's not like you're even saying that the game didn't exist. Because what they're doing is, yeah, cool, you took away their wins, but it's not like you took away the other team's losses.
And when you look at this in the scope of Ole Miss football, this just came out. You think about that Alabama game where those goalposts come down and guys are taking the goalposts to their houses. People are going to remember that game. People remember Jim Boeheim's wins. Vacated wins don't really do anything for any program. So let's change gears now. Go to the best sport on this earth and in the NCAA, lacrosse. Now, stop it. Well, this is not the discussion. Duke is one of many preseason powerhouses to lose early on, but then they beat Denver this past week. You see that loss against High Point by 4 goals. No small means. I remember being with you when we were hearing about that loss, and I was beside myself. So what does it say about the Blue Devils, other powerhouses like them, and college lacrosse as a whole?
I mean, yeah, I think it's just college lacrosse as a whole. We can easily recognize this 2019 season has not been what people have expected. A lot of top seeds have already lost in some of their non-conference games. Duke, as you just saw, lost to High Point. Syracuse lost to Colgate. Number 1 Yale lost to Villanova. We are seeing a lot of teams lose early on. And the thing is, most of the time in some of these team seasons, they have turning points. And for all these teams, it just happened early
Syracuse,
on.
it served as that turning point. Look at what they just did to Albany this past weekend. But at the same time, you see other teams like a Johns Hopkins, right? Now, Towson made it to the NCAA tournament, knocked Syracuse out of the NCAA tournament for that matter. So it's not that they're completely illegitimate, but at the same time, they're no Johns Hopkins.
Right.
So then to have them go down, and then they lose to Loyola again next week, suddenly number 6, number 7, depending on what poll you're looking at, is 0-2.
Right, and specifically just going back to Duke, like, we're not saying Duke is bad. Sure, they lost a High Point, but the point is everyone's basically given one freebie on their schedule.
They also just beat Denver.
They beat Denver, a top 10 team, a lacrosse school. They're fantastic. And of course, Duke is one of the top teams in the ACC, so they're going to have a fine scope on them. But specifically looking at this Duke team, just because they beat Denver, the point is they've already flipped the script.
And the point also being that Duke had an incredible run, just unbelievable, winning face-off after face-off to get themselves back into that game. And that's something that you can do in lacrosse that you can't do in other sports. So those teams that are not necessarily the powerhouses can start to take advantage of that as well as more talent grows, as the sport continues to grow.
Yeah,
Now
totally
let's go
agree.
on to our next break. Coming up, the transfer portal takes us to Mad Libs. We'll be back in 60 seconds.
Fancy pants peanut butter? A big screen television? You haven't even bought a sofa yet. A motorcycle? When your father finds out, he's gonna flip his shoes with 2 buckles? What do you even need 2 buckles for?
Mr. Big Shot, buying whiskey shots for everybody in the bar. From the looks of it, I'd say nobody even remembers.
Feed the pig.
You've messed up your son's haircut.
Mom?
Do you A, try to fix it,
Like it never happened.
B, work with what you got, or C, show solidarity?
Thank you, baby.
As a parent, there are no perfect answers. But you don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. Thousands of teens in foster care will love you just the same.
Welcome back to No Pulp. Zach and Adam here with you, and it's time to play a game of Mad Libs. Now, everyone's played it as a kid. For example, James Dolan is a good owner. But let's get started. Zach, first thing, Duke's incredible comeback of 23 points is blank.
Exciting. It's exciting. It's honestly, we expected this from this Duke team. We hold them to such a high standard because Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, Trey Jones, Cam Reddish, they're a fantastic team. Honestly, I think they're going to win the NCAA championship because no team matches them, and they're basically the only elite team in NCAA basketball right now. But the main reason that this game was so exciting was because we expected them to win. We expected them to go out and beat another ranked ACC team. So obviously, we're all sitting there disappointed that they're down to a Louisville team, and then they come back and win. And especially when Coach K is just like, oh yeah, I don't coach losers. How fantastic is that? I love it. I'm all about this.
Now that Louisville team is one of the greatest success stories when you look at the expectations coming into the season. You see everything that happened with Adidas, but I think the Duke comeback is special. Now we already knew this is the best team in the country on paper. This is the best team in the country in performance this season. I think if we're both right and they end up winning the whole thing, this Duke team could go down, especially after this type of comeback
one of
victory.
the best in history.
One of the best in history. You look at the Fab Five of Michigan. You look at some of Magic's Michigan State teams. You look at some of, not necessarily the UCLA dynasty as a whole, but any of those teams year to year compared to this Duke team, if they take this the whole way, I think that team's going to be in this conversation.
Yeah, but we'll see where those freshmen fall in the NBA draft. But moving on, let's talk about some dismissals from NCAA teams. Vague dismissals are
justified. Internal affairs are internal affairs. They've literally cited legal issues. Schools have cited legal issues in order to protect these kids because they are still kids in school who probably made a stupid decision if I had to guess, but the entire point is that it will be a guessing game because they're going to keep those affairs internal and there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. See, I think they're entirely acceptable. I'm 100% with you. And, you know, for me, I talk about DeAndre Francois when it comes to this one. Obviously, we can see right here, these are the most recent examples. But DeAndre Francois, like, there was no reason why people couldn't find out why he got kicked off the team because it was all over social media. The school, of course, has an obligation to make sure that the students, not professional athletes, the students that are enrolled in those schools, that their affairs, like you said, stay private.
But you mentioned those professional teams, professional athletes, even teams like the Pittsburgh Steelers try to keep those affairs internal as everything is blowing up in their faces with Le'Veon Bell and Antonio Brown. So of course the colleges are going to play the same game. I don't really think that it's that much of a difference.
Right. Only difference is the colleges are basically legally obligated to keep those secret.
Exactly. So moving on to the next topic now. Not exactly a secret, but Anthony Edwards committed to Georgia. And that is
respectable. You gotta love it. Like, he had offers from Kentucky. We've talked about Kentucky a lot already in this show. And obviously, like I've said, perennial powerhouse team, number 5 in the country right now, coming off a big win against the number 1 team in the country.
Recruiting as well.
Right. This is a huge, if the best team in the SEC, and he instead decides to stay with his state school in Georgia. I love it. He's a fantastic recruit, and the biggest reason why I like this is because he talked about Tom Crean, the head coach for Georgia, who's in his first year coaching in Athens, and he coached Dwayne Wade at Marquette, and he coached Victor Oladipo at Indiana.
Pretty good
so
track
he's got
record.
a really good track record. So this is a guy who knows exactly what he wants, and he doesn't care how big the school is because he's going to go out and where he believes he can succeed the most.
Georgia's not exactly a small school.
No.
But I still think it's great for the NCAA.
Yes.
Because you talk about parity, lacrosse has that issue, it's outgrowing that issue now. Basketball, there's plenty of parity. Look at UMBC. You don't have to go that far to see parity all over the place. That's why they call it March Madness. But recruiting parity, you already mentioned it. Duke, Kentucky, in the Big Ten, you think Michigan State. Those teams dominate the landscape of getting the best talent out of high school, but you see so many basketball minds that are able to knock these teams down a peg when it comes to crunch time in March. I think that makes it really special, and I think kind of diverting the talent right out the gate in high school makes it even better.
Yeah. Now, let's stick with the NCAA, obviously. Now, the transfer sit rule is
essential.
Okay.
I saw this in the rundown, and I knew we were going to have some fun. You already mentioned it. They're students, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about this with the vague dismissals, right? They're students. They're not free agents. It's not a free agent pool. There's academics involved. There's credits to be transferred that have to be involved. You can't have this just be an open free agency every time you get around to December, January, February.
See,
it would be a mess.
I think you can.
What's your word?
Outdated. It's incredibly outdated. The thing is, we already allow players to take a grad transfer year and be immediately eligible. Look at Wimbush at UCF.
So that you don't have 23, 24-year-olds playing in the NCAA.
So, who cares? Okay, the reason is we just saw Justin Fields. He's going to be now playing at Ohio State. This whole thing is obviously a money grab. But the fact is, why was he able to transfer?
They already said it. It's a money grab. They're trying to keep the money
why can they
away from
But here's
players.
the thing. Why can they say it to Justin Fields but not enforce it to anyone else who wants to transfer? It's completely skewed. It's skewed towards these fantastic players that they know are going to reel in money to the NCAA and college football.
Well, if that's the direction that they're going to take the rule, then fine, have it be wholesale. I still think that it's an essential piece because these are kids. They're 18, 19, 20 years old. They don't know what it's like to be a free agent. Plus, there's really nothing to it.
Yeah.
There's really nothing that separates the educational experience necessarily, or from an athletic standpoint, aside from, I'm sad, I'm not playing. Well, tough.
Yeah. Now, we're winding down here on No Pulp, but when we come back, David Edelstein will join us on the show, and we'll talk some college hockey. And yes, that proper pronunciation, stick around.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I had something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Welcome back to No Pulp. Zach Lang, Adam Unger, and David Edelstein here to talk, here's how you say it, college hockey.
You got me on this one.
Let's jump right in. David, who is your last team in for the Frozen Four this year?
Is that the accent that we have to use
college
this whole time?
hockey, yes.
I don't think,
just for those 2 words.
I'm not even going to try. I'm from New Jersey, and we have one ice hockey team, only team. But yeah, the last team in, listen, I think it's going to be Bowling Green. When you look at the scheme that's there, you got to think about how the bracketology works. And Bowling Green right now is right on the bubble, as you might say. They are already the number 16 team. But when I'm looking at them for Bowling Green, their record is good. They're a solid team, and they have an interesting mix of players. And I'm thinking of players, they want this tournament to be interesting. The selection committee doesn't just look at pure numbers. They have a whole system, computer generated, but they want it to be interesting. And this is an interesting mix of players. Actually, 3 of their top 5 leaders in points on the team are sophomores. So you've got seniors, you've got freshmen involved, you've got the juniors and sophomores in the core. So when the selection committee is looking at this, they're not just on board with them just because of their strength as a team, but it's an interesting group. And where they've brought this season has been interesting, and they're right there right now in that 16 slot. So the 16 spot is probably what they'll wind up with.
All right, so that's the 16th spot. But do you have a dark horse who could sneak into any of those spots?
I do. And actually, it's a dark horse that actually is in the top 16 right now. But there's a dark horse for a reason. They're Clarkson. Clarkson right now is ranked number 11, but not that far out. But the reason why I think that they could be the dark horse and actually take the whole thing is because this team hasn't lost 2 games in a row since early December. I'm talking like December 1st and 2nd. So this team has a winning attitude, and it's the Frozen Four. But you need to be a hot team when you're coming toward the end of the season. In order to win, you need to be on a streak. And this is the kind of team that has that confidence, and that's shown that they can be streaky, that they can win. And they're in the groove right now. Maybe they've lost to some of these high-ranked teams, but it comes down to the fact, can you win?
So you need that winning attitude. You need to be hot going into the Frozen Four, trying to melt your opponents. How far does Clarkson get? Who do you have in your Frozen Four?
Well, actually, I don't think Clarkson wins it all in the end. I mean, if you're going to take one of the lower tier teams that will make the tournament, of any of those lower tier, keeping that domain there, bracketed, that it would be Clarkson who wins. But I actually think that the 4 will include the number 1 ranked team right now, which is St. Cloud State. And of course, they'd be Cloud 9 if they wound up winning. This team, they have a really good record. I had to. I'm sorry. UMass.
Hey,
keep
don't
going.
apologize.
We
love
keep going.
puns.
UMass has some heavy weight to lift. Mass. It would be their first time in the Final Four, but I think that
Keep
UMass will make it.
I need puns for all 4 finalists.
Well, let me explain that. Being serious. UMass has 21-6 record, hasn't tied with the team, so they've done really well. They're ranked number 3 right now. But then outside of there is the number 5 team, Minnesota State, who also has a really solid record. They played quite a few more games than some other teams, but they've been moving up in the rankings quite a bit as the season has gone on, and they've really proven themselves. Looking at December predictions compared to where they are now, they've really turned things around. And then you look at the number 6 team of Quinnipiac as the 4th team to slot in there. They've got a 21-6-1 record, so they've been really solid. All these teams that I'm choosing have at least 20 wins at this point, and so all of them are really representative of the different leagues that are involved in this, 4 of the different leagues, because again, with bracketology, you need to think about how this works and who will match up against each other. First, they start with
champs as well.
Yes, exactly. First, they start with the 6 conference champs. Then they add in 10 others who are pretty good, and they try and avoid conference matchups in the first round. So when looking at all of that, piecing it together, those 4 teams, I think, St. Cloud State, UMass, Minnesota State, and Quinnipiac will be the Final 4 there in the Frozen Four.
All right, so those are your Frozen Four, but do any of those teams have an MVP on them?
I think that they do. I think St. Cloud does. I think that one of the reasons is that St. Cloud is just so they're really in the spotlight, especially as the number 1 team. And the guy that I would choose is Patrick Newell. This is a young guy on St. Cloud State. He has 32 points to lead his team, but he's not one of the best in the league necessarily. But the thing is that when you're on a team that's doing so well, the spotlight's on you and the spotlight's on him. His team is winning, it's drawing him attention, it's making him look good. And this guy, he has a plus 22 rating on the ice, so 22 goals scored for his team, more than against his team when he's on the ice. 6 from him are game-winning goals that he's had. And this guy only has 2 penalties all season, just 4 minutes, all minors, in the penalty box, so he's on the ice. So when St. Cloud is doing well, they're in the Frozen Four in my prediction. If they wind up winning the thing, or even if they don't, this guy is really showing some stuff as the MVP.
6 game winners. One more pun for you. Would you say he has ice in his veins?
I think he would. I would say he's hot-blooded at the same time, but you never know.
All right, well, thanks for joining us, David. When we come back, 2 top quarterbacks are up for grabs in this year, but who should go off the board first? Stay tuned. This is No Pulp. Welcome back to No Pulp. Zach Lang, Adam Unger here. Now, let's talk quarterbacks. Last year's draft class was very large, 5 quarterbacks taken overall in the first round. This year, who knows what it's going to be, but we got 2 guys who we think are going to go first. We got Haskins and we got Kyler Murray. Who do you think is going to get taken first?
It has to be Haskins. It absolutely has to be. There is so much less risk with Haskins because you look at Kyler Murray and you see baseball. He sounds committed to football, but you don't know when he's going to decide to flip the coin. And I know Baker Mayfield kind of proved the whole Oklahoma system is too quarterback friendly. That doesn't prepare NFL quarterbacks. I know we've seen that narrative be broken by Baker. I don't think Kyler is going to be half the NFL quarterback that Baker is.
Right. For me, it's just the point of the type of quarterback that Haskins is. Haskins is a stand in the pocket, throw it down, very accurate passer. Kyler Murray, he's not the better quarterback, he's the better athlete. We all know he can run, we've seen what he can do. Kind of reminds me of an RG3 type quarterback, won the Heisman to complete that comparison. But the fact is, Haskins is
so the NFL career might compare as well.
Yeah, exactly.
You look at some of those Heisman Trophy winners. You see Robert Griffin III, Johnny Manziel, Tim Tebow.
It's not a great list.
No, it's really not a great track record.
But the point is, you also have to look at the teams that are going to be picking first, and you have the Giants at 6, and you have the Jaguars at 7. Those are the NFL teams that are definitely going to be looking for quarterbacks. And if I'm the Giants, Kyler Murray doesn't fit my system at all. The Giants don't run an offensive scheme where you need a running mobile quarterback. Haskins fits them perfectly. If you're looking at least for someone who fits like the Eli Manning style type of play, who can stand in the pocket and make those accurate passes, or at least accurate from, like, you know, not Eli's sort of perspective. But like, if you're looking for that type of quarterback,
not exactly the best person to learn from.
Haskins is the perfect heir for the Giants.
He has actually also photoshopped himself into a Giants jersey because he's from New Jersey. I think Haskins to the Giants is a really good fit. Now, if anybody else trades up, I've heard the Redskins like Daniel Jones.
The Dolphins might trade up to take Murray too. So if they move up before the Giants, then you know they're going to probably be taking Murray.
I still don't think anybody's going to trade up to take Kyler Murray because there's still so much risk from the baseball front, from the injury front, and from the system front.
Right.
So let's move ahead to some big games this week. All basketball, UNC and Duke. Zach, who do you got?
It's Duke. Like, this is the best rivalry in all of college basketball. But the fact is the Duke Blue Devils have been riding this high since ACC play began, besides that blip against Syracuse. But the fact is Duke is the best team in college basketball. We already talked about it. We think they're going to win the national championship. Tar Heels aren't going to stomp on them.
Maybe one of the best teams ever. I agree. How about Tennessee LSU?
Tennessee, LSU. Oof. I'm going to have to go with LSU. They're riding that high against Kentucky, and honestly, they're one of the most underrated teams in the SEC. So I'm going to go with LSU.
Now, 2 more to go, Virginia, Louisville. I've got Virginia in this one just because I still think that defense is really going to stifle Louisville. They're still kind of settling into that new system.
I also have Virginia. They're outside of Duke, obviously, best team in the ACC. They're slow, but they make it work. Kyle Guy has been an absolute angel for this Virginia team.
Last one, Kansas, Texas Tech.
See, both of these teams are good. The Big 12, not great. But honestly, I have to go with Kansas because they already beat them once by 16. So I think they're going to repeat.
Jarrett Culver.
Jarrett Culver?
Jarrett Culver is going to ball out.
You sure about that?
Absolutely.
You want to put money on it?
At least a double-double. Sure. How much?
Cool. Betting's legal now.
A little bit. You know, whatever. This is fine. No tampering. This was No Pulp. Zach Lang, Adam Unger. On behalf of our entire crew, thanks so much for watching, and have a great night.